thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast. Good morning, everybody. Happy Sunday. Welcome to Teachers Talk Radio for this special show, How to Build Your Anti-Racist Classroom, hosted by Shaniqua, who is just joining us now, and she's going to be joined by Orleen Badu, who is the author of this book, which is published by Sage Education. You can get a 25% discount off the book. We're going to be sharing the coupon code for that within the space, and also we will share it in the description for this episode when it's published as a podcast. So look out for that. If you listen to this, you enjoy it, and you want to get the book, you can get a 25% discount off the book, and we will share details of that during the show, but also in the published details after it. I'm now going to pass over to Shaniqua.
Lovely. I love that there's this great offer, because actually I feel like everyone should be getting this book. So I'm loving that there's a bit of an offer for them to use, for them to get the book. So thank you. And today I'm joined by Orleen. Hopefully she can get on. And we're going to be discussing her book, How to Build Your Anti-Racist Classroom. Orleen, hello, are you there?
I am here. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing this morning?
I'm all right. I've had a very busy morning. I've got kids and clubs and all sorts on a Sunday. So I've done half my day already, but I'm well.
Oh my God. That is amazing. That is amazing. See, that's what happens when you have kids though. Yeah. Everyone says that. They're like up from early, just getting stuff sorted. Whilst me, I'm just, surviving. Oh, we'll talk about surviving actually later.
Yes.
But morning.
Good morning.
So today, and this morning, I'm really excited to be talking about this great book. It's called How to Build Your Anti-Racist Classroom. It is written by the amazing Orleen Badu. And for those of you who don't know, I believe she's a racial literacy expert with a passion for leadership.
Yeah.
She is now a published author, trainer, leadership and education consultant. Oh, Orleen, can you tell us a bit about yourself? Because I know there's a lot.
Yes. So as you know, it's always, I find it difficult to talk about myself, but I'll do the best that I can. So I've been in education for about 23 years now. I have been a teaching assistant, I've been a teacher, I've been a deputy head, and then I've spent about 7 years as a head of a primary school. And I also did a secondment primary head in an all three pupil referral unit, which was quite an experience for me. And wow. Yes, and then due to kind of family circumstances and wanting to have a wider reach, I then worked at a local authority for a few years. Kind of trying to improve outcomes for young Black boys in that particular local authority. And then I just kind of decided that it was about kind of how I can really embed this work, but on a wider scale. So I began at Hackney. I created their diverse curriculum resources, which were downloaded they were downloaded by educators across the globe. And it was straight after summer 2020. So it came out at the time that staff needed it. And then, so I've just kind of been building on that. So I do a lot of training in schools. I work with a lot of senior leaders and staff. I've done a huge amount of staff voice and pupil voice in schools about anti-racism and lived experiences both in school and outside. And then that led to the book that we're talking about. And I'm still surprised to talk about the fact that I've written a book. Even just for...
Isn't it amazing? Even when I was saying it, I was like, published author. This is great. And I was like, I need to start off with that, even though you've done so much. And, even when I was telling everyone, I was like, I've got Orleen on my podcast. I'm so excited to talk to her about the book. And actually, there were 3 people I spoke to, and they were like, I used to work with her. My head teacher actually said, you actually were her head at one point.
My goodness.
Yeah. So it's quite crazy. Someone else said, oh, what, Orleen? I know her. So it was like, I used to work in her school and her husband and all of that. I was like, wow. And that just shows me, like, you've done such great work all across everywhere, and especially in London. Like, your name is, so great. So I feel quite honoured right now to have you on and to be able to talk about your book, which,
Yeah.
by the way, when did it come out? When did it
It
come out?
came out in officially, the official date was June. It came out on June the 12th. And it's just, so this is a journey for me because I'm still learning how to do this. And, you know, the opportunity to kind of write a book and to talk about what I'm most passionate about, and to be, you know, to be sharing that as wide as possible is a real privilege for me. It doesn't, I'm very aware of that and trying to do my bit to kind of, you know, having been a head teacher, but also having been a child in our education system a long time ago, fair enough. But, you know, when I think about the challenges that I have faced as a child and that children are still facing today, I kind of feel like, you know, there's work to do. And that, yeah, this is my opportunity to be a part of that.
No, and it's a great opportunity. And I think, and we're going to go through some of the things you mentioned in the book and some of the chapters, but also, unlike everyone, I'm not going to say too much. We're not going to say too much because you need to read it. But there are some amazing things you throw out and things that I believe like people keep quiet about, you know, and you discuss that. And actually, it's so important that we have these conversations and we talk about it. And actually, I took this book on holiday. I started reading it when I was on holiday in the sunshine in Lisbon. And it was great that I was constantly reading it, highlighting pages like, oh my God, I can relate, or this is giving me something to reflect and think about. And this week I was going through it again and I have my MPQ assignment on leading behaviour culture. And literally, I was like, I need to reference some of Orlean. Like, it's one of those books, everyone, that I really just recommend that I think it's a bit like a, you know, in a non-blasphemous way, an education Bible. It's actually up there, I would say. You know, and it's got all the bits that I think a lot of educators and a lot of people shy away from. So if we are, you know, how would you explain your book, actually?
That's a really good question. And I think what I tried to do was, as I said, I've been ahead, I've been a teacher, I now go into schools all across the UK actually, and there's a couple of schools, like international schools globally, that are like we want to speak to you as well. But so actually I've had the privilege of talking to so many school leaders, and when I say school leaders, I believe every teacher is a school leader because of our position.
Thank you.
Yes, because of our position in our community, our skill, and our ability to affect history, which I'm happy to talk about a bit more later. But having all of this knowledge and all of this feedback, it was really clear to me that actually I meet so many teacher leaders who are so keen to do the work of anti-racism, but actually, you know, it's about making it visible. So where do I start? How do I start? You know, if I've come into teaching as a vocation, which many of us have, if we've come into teaching to make a difference, it can be really hard to see where racism may exist in our classrooms or in our hallways or in our playgrounds. So actually this book was a way to kind of make that as visible as possible, to really empower teacher leaders to be able to dismantle it. Because it's really hard to dismantle it if you're not aware of where it presents or how it presents. So it was really just about making it visible, so that we could do the work.
And do you know what? When you read through the book, it really does have you reflecting and thinking, oh, have I thought about this? We talk about, you know, unconscious challenging, unconscious bias. And we start to go into, you know, what is an ally and non-racist versus anti-racist teachers. And actually just having a real think. And actually, even when you spoke about allies, and actually some people say they're an ally, but actually, are you an ally? And just having that chance to just think, I think that's great. So actually, if I mention it, your book couldn't have come out or, you know, being talked about, especially at such a better time. Because I feel like we look at what's going on in the world, and especially what's going on in the UK at the moment with the government. And, you know, it gets me a bit frustrated when we talk about systematically racist, where the government will tell you, that, no, there's no systematic racism. And then you look on the news, you read stuff, and actually, I think you begin to talk about it, but we live in a country that politically wants us to believe that we should not reflect on the systematic challenges. It's like, no. And I think that's great, because I think that's how you started your book.
Yes. I mean, I think it's worth, we need to know where we are and we need to know the context. So, you know, I
Mhm.
am very aware of kind of power structures that may create that cognitive dissonance. So, it doesn't, you know, the country's not racist as per the government's last race report that was led by Dr. Tony Sewell. And actually,
Mhm.
the challenges of that, because that was really negating the experiences of many people that live and reside in the UK. So actually, having a report
Mhm.
that tells me that racism doesn't exist, apart
Yeah.
from on what was formerly known as Twitter, I find really
Yeah.
challenging. So,
Yeah.
and there are reasons for that. There are lots of reasons for that, which I probably won't spend too long going on to now, because if I get on the political road, that'll be quite
No.
difficult to come back off of. But actually, I think it's,
Oh, and then I'll get started,
yes,
and then we're both on a little
exactly.
tangent. So don't worry. But I feel you. I totally feel you, and I
Mm,
think, but that's a really important place to start
yes,
with everything that goes on. And you know, not to get too political,
yeah,
but even if we looked at the news, was it last week,
yeah,
where someone talks about, multiculturalism
mm,
is failing us
yes,
and all of that, and I just thought, wow,
yes,
how does that make me feel?
yeah,
How does it make children listening to that feel?
yeah,
Like, whoa,
absolutely.
whoa. So
And
going through that,
yeah,
sorry, go
no,
on,
it's all
my
right. I
bad.
was just going to say, and I think it's being aware of why those messages are being shared and being, so
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things for us is to decide, are we going to be a leader that disrupts inequality, or are we going to be a leader that, by being passive or actively, are we
Mm-hmm.
going to uphold it? So when I hear
Yep.
when I hear all these narratives, I'm very aware of kind of the trying to uphold those narratives. And actually, our work and the work of many of us that want to be anti-racist in education is how we disrupt those inequalities, and not to be swayed by that, and
Yes.
to stay true to our purpose and our core. So the book as well is
Mm-hmm.
another way of, it is a response to race reports that say racism doesn't exist. It is a response to those people that say actually there are no inequalities,
Mm-hmm.
and it's got the data and it's got the research behind it, but more importantly, it's got all those lived experiences of children and staff that I've been lucky enough to work with.
And I really appreciate you sharing, their stories and sharing experiences,
Mm,
because actually, there's some people who will read this and be like in shock. They'll be like,
yeah,
whoa, I didn't realize. And actually, it's just so important to be able to share that. And
yeah,
you also start off with summer 2020,
yes,
which uh,
mm,
I remember summer 2020 quite well.
mm,
And I remember all of a sudden in schools,
yeah,
you know, conversations were starting to be had. But actually,
mm,
I used to think, is this just for this moment in time?
yeah,
And sorry, we talk about summer 2020.
yeah.
What what am I talking about for summer 2020? Orleen, I'll bring it back to you.
Okay, so I think one of the things that I think is really important to share is that
Mm-hmm.
I was working in a local authority at the point at which we were in the midst of lockdown. It had been the
Yeah.
tragic and brutal and very public murder of George Floyd.
Yep.
And I think the whole world being at home and looking at that, it kind of presented challenges for us all in terms of equality or inequality as it exists in our society, and actually facing it and seeing it,
Yeah.
because actually being at home, we couldn't turn away from it. We couldn't
Right.
blame the individual. We couldn't, we had to face those
Mm-hmm.
inequalities that were experienced. And actually, I working in a local authority that was very diverse. It was amazing the amount of young people and their families that were writing to local authorities and writing to schools and saying we need to do more. So actually, being a
Yeah.
part of that, it was very
Yeah.
clear that actually it wasn't just because leaders in these spaces were saying that enough was enough, but actually the community collectively was
Right.
saying enough, we need to face it, we need to challenge it. And that actually is a
Yep.
very different motivation,
Mm-hmm.
because actually you're hearing from the people who are impacted most, or you're hearing from the people in the community that want to support those that are the most marginalised. And there was a drive for that. So it was what could the response be to that? Are we
Yep.
gonna just be passive, see these responses
Yep.
coming in and do nothing, and therefore uphold what was already
Yep.
happening, or were we going to try and disrupt it? Were we going to respond in a way that we could work with the community, to challenge and to dismantle. And that kind of, I often, whenever I do training, I often talk about working, pre-summer 2020, we'd probably all say in schools, we follow the Equalities Act, we fulfill our duty, we are non-racist, and that's really, and actually now we know that that's a really passive role, because that's about seeing inequality and not doing anything about it. And largely, if you're not disrupting inequality, that often means you're benefiting from it in some way. But not facing the challenges that children face. I think we're really good at looking at the challenges they face outside of school, but actually it's much harder to face the challenges that they face inside. And being open and honest about that. And actually, this work was about moving on from that post summer 2020. How do we be anti-racist? And that's an active role. How do we disrupt inequality where we see it? How do we have those challenging conversations? And they are challenging. And they're even more challenging if you don't know, if you don't have the data to back it up, or if you think that something's unequal, but it's hard to make it visible, or it's hard to verbalize what that might be. So this book was really about how we move from that passive space into the active. And I hope that it kind of really kind of does that work of, many of the staff that I talk to saying we don't want to be passive. And actually, what are the things that we can do to actively be a part of the change? Because, teachers, educators, anybody that works in school, we have the power to disrupt inequalities, but also to change outcomes for our young people. And I feel like there's always been activism within education. There's always been those staff for whom, how can we actively do more? And I hope that this book is a way of kind of supporting that.
No, I definitely think it is. And I think, like you said, it delves into those quite hard conversations, but conversations we need to have. And I remember reading your book, but also the conversation I was having around that time when it came to white privilege. Yes. And what I loved is you go through and explain what that is. Because I think as well, with wordings, people are like, what are you trying to say? What do you mean? I don't have privilege. And actually, and I think I'm just going to read a little section from your book where you talk about white privilege. And you say, white privilege does not mean that life is easy, without challenge, and has been handed to you on a plate. What it can mean is that you see yourself in every advert as the norm. You go to any shop, anywhere in the UK, and buy foods that reflect your culture. You can go to any business and expect to see a senior leader that looks like you. You can count on your skin colour not working against any evaluation of your financial reliability. You'll never be asked to speak on behalf of your entire racial group. You'll be taught a curriculum which validates the existence of your race. You can be assured that if a police officer stops you, it is not because of your race. You can easily buy books, children's toys, posters, greeting cards, or magazines that show people of your race. You can expect when seeking legal or medical help that the colour of your skin will not work against you. And when I read that, I was like, do you know what? This is a perfect way of explaining what white privilege is. And I remember at the time I was having discussions with the children in my class. And I remember a member of staff was like, oh, should you be having these conversations? I was like, no, I believe I should. And, it got to that little part where people were like, should we be having these conversations? Should we not? And I just thought, no, it's important conversations to have. And I think, if I remember correctly at that time, we were talking about Black Lives Matter in my classroom and in the school. And I think it was on News Round. And one of my teaching assistants at the time, she was like, I don't agree with this, all lives matter. And it was like, and I was just like, oh, how did the kids feel that we've just watched news and we've had a discussion and you've just said this? I was like, maybe we need to have a conversation ourselves and educate each other and talk to each other, because it's not what you think. When she said to me, she was like, I've been through hard times. I struggle just as much as everyone else. And I was like, we need to have a conversation. So actually, I really appreciated you putting that in the book, and because it's really important to have. And actually, when we talk about being non-racist and anti-racist, that's important, I believe.
And I think it's, I thank you for that description of it, because actually I think it is important. And what I would say is that whenever I start any training that I do, I always start with kind of just being clear about the terminology, because everybody needs to be coming from the same starting point. And that was the purpose of the book as well. How do we have these racially literate conversations as teens. And actually, to be racially literate is to have an understanding of how race and racism works in the UK, not to turn away from it, to understand it. And actually, if we don't have the language to support that, it's a really difficult conversation. So it's really important to be clear about the language as a staff team, to then be able to have those conversations which will move the dial. I think it's really important. So whenever I go into schools, I will always have that conversation, and I do often get challenged about, it's really important for all lives, and every protected characteristic is important, Orleen. And I don't dispute that at all. I think every child in our care is of huge importance and value. The issue that we have is that they haven't always had the same experience of value and having a sense of belonging, and systemic racism that exists across our society, and therefore will be present in our schools, is a huge barrier for some of our children. So yes, we recognise that every child is important, but it's about understanding that actually we've had an equalities duty for decades that hasn't had enough of an impact on those children whom are marginalised because of their race. So actually, we're not saying nobody else matters, but what we are saying is, and what the research tells us is, the more that we focus on the group that are most marginalised within our society, the better the outcomes for all. Because actually, if you do the best for that group, by the very nature of that, what you're doing is upskilling your approach, your experience, your knowledge, which will, the byproduct of that is that everybody will benefit from that. So it's not about it's about, let's focus on the group that experiences the most disadvantage, systemic disadvantage, mind, and then by doing that, it improves outcomes for all. And actually, that's a space that we all have to commit to, and be prepared to. And actually, largely, when we focus on race, the difficulty is not about, what would I say? I'd say that I've heard every reason why we shouldn't focus on race in my work with schools and other organisations as well. So I'm used to hearing it's about everybody. I'm used to hearing where's the research? It's all the things that, because actually it's a difficult concept to grapple with. And that's okay that it's difficult. That's okay that it might bring up particular feelings. That's okay that we might find it challenging, but actually what's not okay is experiences our children are having. So we have to push ourselves through that, because actually the privilege of discomfort is very small in comparison to the lived experiences of some of the children that we're serving. So actually my discomfort, actually that's a privilege, that it's only discomfort we feel. And I, sometimes I kind of think, when people talk to me about privilege, because actually it's, again, thinking about that political context, but the media also will kind of sell that idea of, if you're called privilege, it means you've got a 7-bedroom house, it means life is easy. And obviously that's not the experience for everybody in the UK, and nor is it the experience for everybody who is racialised as white in the UK. So, but that's not what it's about. It's about, I think a really good way of summing it up is that privilege is, to have privilege is to live with the absence of racism. And that's really important for us. If you don't experience racism in the UK, that is a privilege. And I think it's really a really helpful resource to kind of have a look at is maybe Peggy McIntosh's Invisible Knapsack, which is about kind of assets that are in this weightless, invisible knapsack, which is all the things that you mentioned from the book already. And I think it's really important to recognise that life is not easy, life is challenging, life is difficult, but there are some for whom there are unearned assets just by the very nature of characteristics that you're born into. And it's been able to have those really adult grown-up conversations about that, and to be able to think about how we use our privilege to benefit our children.
You explained that beautifully.
Thank you.
I'm not gonna have to share this with everyone because it's just so well explained, and I can feel the passion, and I think that's so important. And at the end of the day, this is what our children need. Like, reading through, and you read through some of like the statistics and case studies, and you're like, well, this is what our children deserve. They deserve you know, for us as adults to have these conversations, these important, difficult conversations at times, but important conversations. And actually, leading on from that, I believe there's a conversation where you talk about challenging your unconscious bias.
Yes.
That's one of your chapters. And actually, I think
Go on, I'm interested.
I know a lot of people will be like, I don't have any.
Yeah.
I don't have any. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yes.
And actually, I love that you explained that, you know, accepting that we all have an innate habit within us. That means we make split-second assessments about people all of the time. You know, that's true and it's important. And we all have unconscious bias. I have unconscious bias. And it can't be switched off. I think you said it can't be switched off. And I remember thinking, yeah, you're right. But then, you know, how do we manage our biases? And you go through it in that chapter, which is great.
Yeah, I think so. One of the things I get two challenges on unconscious bias. I'll be honest. There is the challenge of teacher leaders that have come into this profession for a vocation. They've come into this profession because they want to directly impact on the lives of children, and they're motivated to educate our children so that they can lead fulfilling lives. And actually, that doesn't always sit well with and your bias. People are like, I came into this to help children, so I can't be biased or I can't be racist or I can't do those things because that's not the very nature of why I came into this role was to challenge that. And, you know, we have to break down kind of how that can still arise, which I'll talk about in a bit. But the other side of the coin is the staff that say to me, and I get this challenge very often, you know, look, the government says that we shouldn't be doing unconscious bias. All these people say we shouldn't be talking about unconscious bias because we shouldn't give people reasons for being biased or racist. We shouldn't say, oh, you made a mistake. You can be forgiven because we all have this bias, so not to worry. So there's always the two that I'm grappling with. So I'll answer that. I'll speak to that one first because I think it's really important to recognise that talking about biases is how do we challenge them? So it's not to say this is your get out of jail clause. I didn't know, so therefore it can't be racist. That's not the purpose of learning about our unconscious biases. The purpose of learning about them is to understand how they may present and therefore to think about how we challenge them. So it's not you've got this, poor you, we've all got it, you know, it's okay. But actually what it is you now know that you have this. So what are you going to do to reflect and to challenge that? And that's, you know, where that training is done well, it encourages staff to recognise that actually I do have these biases, but that is not a reason to exhibit them. What it means is that I may exhibit them, but how can I use reflection? How can I challenge myself to learn and to reduce them, and to continually develop that learning? The other side of the coin, which is that yes, we do all have it. And it's really important that even if you came into this field as a vocation, even if you feel that you challenge your biases every day, it's about recognizing that it's an innate human response. We all have it. And I talk about that quite extensively in the book about where that's come from and why we do that. But actually, it's really important that we need to get out of our own way, is what I would say.
Yes.
We need to recognise that we do all have it, we do all exhibit it. There will be, like, for example, I explain in the book that, you know, it's hugely biased when you're walking down the road, you see somebody that looks unsafe. It's a hugely biased decision that would make you cross the road because your biases determine that person looks unsafe. Now, I still do that. Even though I am the person that's going out there and trying to challenge my biases every day, I can still make those biased decisions. So actually, if somebody was to hold me to account about crossing the road, I can't get upset and cry and say, I can't believe that you said I'm biased. I'm not that way. What I have to be able to do is to say, you know what, you're right, I did cross the road. And actually, now that I'm reflecting on it, it was a biased decision that made me cross that road. And actually, I'm going to try and learn from that. That's a response. That's a response that is going to push us forward in our learning. That's a response that's going to allow us to understand where we're making mistakes and learn from them. If I do I don't, you know, I'm really upset. How could you? Actually, I've stopped the learning at that point. I'm not doing any more learning because I've taken it personally. I've been, you know, I feel like you're attacking me, and therefore that's going to stop me from doing that. It's going to stop me from learning, which means I'll probably exhibit that bias again. I'll probably repeat it. I'll probably be so kind of engrossed in my own feelings of how upset I was by that and how I, you know. So actually, it's really about, we're lifelong learners. And I think it's really important that anti-racism has to be a part of that lifelong learning also.
No, that was said so greatly. And actually, I think even in your book, you have and I shared the picture of, so I think Teachers Talk Radio have just shared the picture, and it's of the line of men. And actually, just like kind of what you said, and it says you will see 5 men all dressed in traditional work attire staring out at you. So if you guys can't see it, it's we've just tweeted it out. Take a moment and look at them. What are they wearing? Their facial expressions, the way they wear their hair, the stance they take. Now, if one of them were the CEO of a high-performing FTSE 100 company, who would that be?
Yeah.
And, you know, you go through that. And also you mentioned, because I'm like, oh, well, people want to do it. Do I even want to do this? I think you go, you know, I'm aware that, you know, you're going to think about this decision, but who would it be? You have no idea. You don't know where they live, their ages, whether they were educated, if they were educated, but who would you choose? And it's interesting because I already know who people would choose, who I choose.
Yeah.
And then we move on. Then you move on to explain as head teachers. You know, if I ask you a different question of that lineup, who in this lineup is a head teacher? You know, and you mentioned recent UK data would suggest that black man would not be mentioned, as currently only 2% of teachers in the UK are black. So even when you mentioned you're a head teacher, I was like, you know, amazing, amazing.
And then, and I was a head teacher. It's really interesting because I, you know, if I think about the accountability that I experienced as a head teacher, there was a huge amount, because I had to challenge biases every day to get into that role. I had to challenge biases every day to be trusted to continue that role. I had to, you know, and it's really interesting because when I do training and I show people that lineup, I often get people that are just really mad at me for putting that, like, no, we're not doing it. We've been brought up not to make decisions about people based on what they look like. I've been taught that you should, you know, you should judge somebody by the content of their character. And I'm just like, yes, we should. And yes, we must actively strive to do that. But we must also be aware of the fact that we will make decisions about people every single day. And actually, when you do that lineup, I think it's really important that actually the main takeaway from that is that everybody, even if you decide you're not doing it and you're going to go against whatever you think my agenda is by asking you that question, there is still some bias that has led to that decision. You know, I know what she's trying to get at. I know what she's looking for. I'm not going to give her what she wants. I'm going to go the opposite of what she, I'm going to do the opposite of what she's expecting. But actually, it's about recognizing that every single day we make decisions about people all of the time, and that it's the same with children, it's the same with their families. When they come and present to us, we have our preconceptions of what to expect, how to what we can trust, what feels safe, what feels, you know, what feels like what presents as what a parent should present as opposed to, you know. So actually it's really important that if we don't know that, then how are we going to do the work of dismantling inequality? If we're fighting on that point, how are we going to do the work that is necessary? So actually we do make decisions about people every day, and actually the more stressed we are, the more difficult those decisions become, or the more seeped in bias that those decisions become. Because when we're stressed, we need to, our brains, we like to understand, everything needs to make sense to us. So actually when we're really feeling stressed, we will quickly make decisions, we'll quickly categorize people to help us to feel in control of the situation. And you know, a parent coming to you, I often talk in the book about a parent kind of coming over to you in the playground, you know, and kind of the preconceptions you'll have if you think that parent's storming across the playground towards you, as opposed to the parent walking across the playground to talk to you. The preconceptions you'll have if it's a Friday afternoon and you're exhausted, you've been teaching all day, and a parent comes and asks you a challenging question. It's all the things it's all the biases that will. So that lineup is hopefully a way of people understanding that it's something that we all do, and it's something that we all have to challenge within ourselves, and which I haven't mentioned today yet, it's something that we have to challenge in each other.
Yeah, we do have to challenge it in each other, and even just listen to you, I know it's not easy at all, it's not easy at all, but these things need to be done. And Orleen, I'm really enjoying this.
Oh.
And I can see that a lot of people are listening.
Yeah.
Thank you to those who have tweeted or X'd, whatever we say nowadays, and are enjoying. Please do share the space on X or Twitter. I still call it Twitter, but please do. If you are enjoying this conversation, please do share the space. Feel free to call in. If you have any questions, anything you'd like to ask Orleen or share, please do. We'd love that. And what's great is that Sage Publications, they have given us a discount code, and the discount code is TTR25 for this book. So if you purchase directly from the Sage website, you will get 25% off. The code has been retweeted, and it's been tweeted on the Teachers Talk Twitter page, but the discount code is TTR25. Tell your friends, tell everyone, and please do call in, please share the space, because I'm very much enjoying talking about this book. And can I just mention to everyone, I think what's great about this book is, Orleen does explain everything. She breaks it down, but she doesn't overload you with too much, because she breaks it down by, giving you great, informative, relevant statistics. There's always questions. She gives you questions to think about. I love the reflection pages, because there's just these reflection questions where I'm like, oh, I could do this in my classroom. What could I do? Who could I talk to about this? And there's acts, so there's things to act on, which is always so great, where I'm like, I want to get this started. Let's move on with this journey. Let me not just say it, let's do it. There's activities for you to act on. There's case studies where you see what schools have actually done, what they put in place. And actually, there's quite a few where I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. And I can see, they've worked together to realise there's a problem here. And they're moving forward as a school. There's plans. What's great is references. So even at the moment, I'm going for it and I'm like, I want to references, because I'm always like, I know people will be like, who said this? Where'd you get that from? She's got the references in place, resources. There's documentaries she mentions you can watch, films you can watch, books you can read, scripts to use in the class and school. So it's honestly, I think it's such a great book. So I do highly recommend. So please get it off the Sage website. Get it with your 25% off discount code. And please do tell people to join the space. But I'm going to go to... Well, reading up about you, Orleen, it says you're a racial literacy expert.
Yes.
And it's mentioned throughout your book, the word racial literacy. But what is racial literacy?
So this is like my number one question. Most people are like, yeah, Orleen's a racial literacy expert. And then they're like, so what is it, Orleen? And I think I tend to, the description that I think is most helpful is the one that was in the report by Dr. Joseph Remy Salisbury. And he did a report for the Runnymede Trust about racism in secondary schools. And that was a really powerful piece of research for me in terms of articulating the challenges of racism in schools, in UK schools, and really making it very clear. But actually, in that report, they talk about racial literacy as it's having a full understanding, and I say full, so through the lenses of those most marginalised, it's having a full understanding of what race and racism looks and feels like in the UK. So my work essentially in the education space is about how do I provide that lens to what race and racism looks and feels like in the UK, how it operates, how it interlocks, how it, the presence of it across all of the work that we do. Because actually, if you can't see it, then or if you've not had an experience in which you've seen it, it's very difficult to know how to disrupt it. You can't disrupt something that you can't see or that you haven't experienced. So I often see my work as, being that person that allows schools to see where it exists and how it exists, and to then be able to have the tools to tackle it. Is that okay?
No, that is okay. That is, I can tell you've had to say that quite a few times. But okay, and you mentioned this, and I'm just going to ask. I feel like I know the answer, but is racial literacy a whole school responsibility?
Oh my goodness! So, in a nutshell, yes. It's very difficult to do this work in isolation. So I really toyed with when I had a fabulous editor, by the way, I must say, who really empowered me to do this work of writing the book, and in a way that I think without her I probably wouldn't have I wouldn't have done it, if I'm honest. And I think one of the things that was really important about my editor, Delana Spencer, who's a fabulous woman of colour.
Shout her out.
I
Shout
know,
her out.
I'm shouting out Delana Spencer. She was my editor, and she was absolutely fantastic in breaking down barriers for me. I don't even know she knew that I felt that they were barriers, but she definitely dismantled a lot of barriers that allowed me to write this book and to overcome the challenges that present itself when writing a book. But I, you know, it's recognizing the cogs that allowed me to do this work. So I kind of feel like, as a head teacher, because I had lived experience of racism, both in school and across society, I therefore was in a better position to be able to, you know, set. You know, it was anti-racism was our work. It was what we did in our school. It was the way that we, you know, we had children that came from very marginalised communities that were experiencing real challenges, harm, and so therefore all of our work had to be anti-racist for them to be able to thrive. Like, you know, their academic outcomes were super important to us because we knew that was the platform that was going to make the difference. We knew that we had to do everything. We had to use every resource that we had to ensure that their outcomes allowed them to thrive. So in that very nature, we were, you know, a lot of the work that we were doing was anti-racism, and it wasn't just being non-racist. But you know, I've had those experiences as well myself, which kind of drove, you know, that was the motivation. And I then therefore worked with a lot of staff that had that motivation as well. And I kind of feel like if you go into a space where, you know, I often say to schools, it's our responsibility to be anti-racist, and that actually, if staff or teachers come into our schools and they're not anti-racist, then they won't stay for long because they'll be like, this is not the space for me. And actually, that's okay. That's a good thing, because we want the staff that want to challenge this. It is now. So my challenge when writing the book, and I'm not sure if I ever will reconcile whether I did the right thing or not, but my challenge was, do I write a book that is for the whole school, or do I write a book for the teacher that could end up in a school that's not ready to do this work? And that was really difficult to make the decision. You know, what do I do? And actually, I felt my first step was, I'm going to write this book for teachers, and if they are, so whether they are in a school that is doing the work or not, they know where to start. But actually, this work can be backbreaking, it can be isolating. You know, if you're having conversations that people aren't comfortable about having, you can be marginalized by the very nature of having those conversations. So it's but also, you know, to have long lasting impact. My thing is, we want anti-racism to last long beyond our tenure. Yeah, we want it to. We want to start something in the school that is not going to only exist as long as we are there, but is going to last beyond our time there, because that's the thing. That's what's going to have most impact. So if we're doing it on our own, that's really, really difficult. And actually, if we're doing it on our own, not only can it feel isolating, but it's likely that it's not going to last beyond our time there. So it's really important that we think about, actually, how can we, as a whole school, drive this work forward? How can it be part of everything that we do? And actually, you know, if you're writing a school development plan, for example, to have anti-racism as one point on your school development plan is not going to work. It has to be threaded throughout every single thing that we do. And therefore, what that does is it empowers teachers to feel like they can make those changes, they can have those conversations, they can disrupt that data, they can, you know, be reflective about their practice in a way that is going to affect change. So I think it's really important, where possible, it has to be a whole school movement, because I believe it's a movement. But where it isn't, you know, one individual can create that. So I think it's really important to recognise our agency and our power to start the work. And you know, who knows, having the data, having books that support that may help us to convince our school leadership that actually this is a whole school issue that we need to focus on.
And you're right, it should be a whole school. It should be. But I also realise as well, and you mentioned it quite short, you know, it's a tiny bit. And you mentioned why you say it a tiny bit, but teacher training.
Yes.
This is, you know, it's not really included. We don't really talk about racial literacy and, you know, diversity, inclusion. It's not really, or it's not spoken about for a long time. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I went through teacher training 100 years ago, obviously, and it was really, it was very white. It was very much about kind of, you know, all of the data and the research that upholds the system that we have in place. It wasn't until years later that I began to engage with books and texts and research that really challenged, like Paulo Freire, for example. You know, those things didn't come as a result of my teacher training. So I kind of feel like that there was a huge missed opportunity there, and it's really challenging that, you know, 20 odd years later, when staff are going through teacher training, it's still not as present as it should be. There are still staff that are coming out of teacher training having done little to nothing on anti-racism. And now lots of people tell me, well, we do it on inclusion, so we do it on, you know, thinking about all children, but actually that focus on anti-racism, there's no mandate that says it has to happen. So therefore we're relying on teacher training, teacher trainer providers to want to do that work, but actually that reliance means that they can if they choose to, and they cannot if they choose to. And I think it's really dangerous when you live in areas where, well, we have, you know, we don't have many diverse communities, so it's not an issue here. Actually, the more monocultural your area is, the deeper the necessity to do this work for a variety of reasons. The main reason being that you're developing the anti-racist leaders of the future. So if your children are not seeing anti-racism wherever they are, they're not going to be the leaders that drive it when they're in those positions of leadership. So it's imperative for all of us. But one of the things I would say as well is that where it is happening in teacher training, which is fantastic, I often also don't really think we're not hearing from the voices of those that are most marginalised. So, you know, if you're being taught a module by somebody who has lived experience, they're able to make that visible for you. They're able to help you to understand the way that impacts. If you're being taught a module on anti-racism by someone that hasn't experienced racism, it's a slightly different dynamic, and that's okay. But I do think that teacher trainer providers should be doing this work, but if they are, you need to provide a range of voices on that, to make sure that your trainee teachers, if they don't have exposure and access to different voices in their surroundings, we're making sure that they're getting that as part of their training.
I hope some teacher trainers are listening to this. I hope they do end up listening. And getting the book. I really hope they do. And like I said, feel free to order through Sage Publishing directly and get your 25% off discount with the code TTR25. Oh, do you know what? There's so much I want to discuss on that. I'm not going to have enough time. There is so much that you wrote. And actually, let me go to a point where it was where I know it's quite a controversial point for some people. And you mentioned the term behaviour is communication. And I don't know if you ever see on this app, a lot of people have big discussions about the phrase behaviour is communication. What do you think of it? You mentioned that in your book. Do you believe behaviour is communication?
I do, and it seems to be the biggest point of contention wherever I go.
So I can, out of all the books as well, I can imagine this is the point that's going to be it.
I'm telling you, I have prepared myself for all sorts of comebacks about bits in the book. This is the one bit. And I just thought, and actually I think, and it's okay, because I think debate is really important. And I think I'm coming from a position of having been in schools and experienced a range of behaviours that have been displayed. And actually, I do not think that any child is born with an inherent need to just disrupt for no reason at all, other than I feel like it, or I need attention, or I'm going to disrupt my teacher. Like I do believe that even if a child is, whatever their reason for the behaviour that they're exhibiting, it's communicating something. So it's not, even if you think they're just misbehaving. It's communicating to you that that they want to misbehave. I don't necessarily believe that children just want to misbehave. I often believe that they are communicating something, and whether they're able to verbalize what that is or not, I don't know if we always give them the space to verbalize what they may be experiencing, or or they don't feel safe enough to verbalize what they're experiencing. But I do believe that it is communicating, and in the book I talk about the fact that it is communicating an unmet need, which again is like it's like a match, like do you know what I mean? They're communicating an unmet need, and then I get a big response again, and that's okay, because as I said, you know, it's about debate, it's about understanding. But I can only speak on my experiences as a teacher and a head teacher. I can't speak for every teacher and head teacher, but my experiences is that when a child is exhibiting behaviours, challenging behaviours, should I say, because they exhibit behaviours all day long. Sometimes we don't mind them because that's a compliant behaviour. It's when it's a challenging behaviour that it becomes a problem. But actually, there is every child. I used to take as a teacher, I was the one that would always get caught up in the conversations with children about, you know, restorative conversations. I was known for it. I was known for it in my leadership as well. I was the one that would always come back and reflect with the children and understand what's going on and unpick why that happened or how it happened. And there was never a conversation where we couldn't unpick that actually there was a need that they needed answering, and it came through in their behavior. And that didn't mean that I would say to the children, well, that's okay then, because you had an unmet need. What it meant was, now that we were able to unpick and understand what the need was, we were able to then find a response that would have been appropriate. We're able to talk about a response. And actually, some children have the privilege of having that experience all the time. There are some children for whom they exhibit a challenging behavior, and their teachers may well take that restorative approach, may well say, oh gosh, that's not like them, may well try to find ways of supporting them, may well go and speak to their DSL, or, you know, go and speak to their team and say, I need some help, this child, you know, is really dysregulated, this is not what we're used to. But it's, by the same token, it's recognizing there are some children for whom, when exhibiting those same behaviors, we hear things like they chose to misbehave. You know, they're kicking off as opposed to they're dysregulated, and then they get pushed down a behavior route, a risk-based approach, as was talked about in the Child Q report. And actually, so, you know, there are children having different experiences about their behaviors and the support that they get as a result of it. And I think it's really important for us as educators to be really clear about what responses are all of our children getting. And it's not difficult to do that, because all you have to do is go back and reflect on your behaviour data. All you have to do is go back and reflect on the, you know, if you've had to log a behaviour incident, the way it's been logged, the language that's been used, the way the child has been viewed, you know, using words like dysregulated versus kicking off, using words like I was really concerned versus this child chose to do this, using words like I'm going to sit down and speak to the parents so we can come to a solution together versus I'm telling that parent that their child's going to be removed from the classroom. It's, you know, how do we reflect on those decisions that we're making? And reflection is really an important part of the whole of this book. So that's, you know, all the research says if you're going to disrupt racism, if you're going to disrupt bias, you have to be able to reflect on your actions. And that reflective practice is going to be a really important part of all of this work.
Yeah. And actually, it can be hard, though. It can be hard to reflect. But I think you have to be honest with yourself. And I think a lot of it, what's great is, like, in every chapter, all the time, there's reflections. And you put the questions in place. And actually, you know, I remember sitting there and I'm like, okay, reflecting on this, how do I plan this? I think when it came to this chapter, you spoke about behavior being communication. Behavior is communication. Why you wrote, why is this child displaying challenging behavior or behaviors in my class? And, you know, it was, you know, I sat there and thought, okay, why? And even just now, we use the terminology dysregulated. So I worked in a Peru last year, in a primary Peru, and actually I realized the wording, we had to change a lot of the wording that was used, that we used a lot in mainstream. It was very different. It was using dysregulated and, you know, using our zones and, you know, you're allowed to be angry, that's okay. And, you know, it's very different. And actually, sometimes you'd see some of their mainstream teachers come in and you could see, because they'd come and visit, and you could see how different the relationships were, and just how different they were spoken to.
Mm.
And I just found that quite interesting. And, you know, talking of working in Peru,
Yes.
you obviously worked in a Peru,
Mm.
and well, you were a head teacher in a Peru.
Yeah.
And I think for me, the reason why I wanted to work in a Peru, even though I only did
Mm.
it for a year, but working in that, I just, you know, data shows that you get a lot of black boys who
Mm.
end up in Peru's.
Mm.
And actually, I know a lot of people who are against it. They were like, no more exclusions. We
Mm.
don't, you know, none of that. They were all against Peru's. And I just said, there are still Peru's. Regardless,
Mm.
there are Peru's.
Yeah.
So actually, I want to go in there and try my best and, you
Mm.
know, try and find out what's going on, what's happening with our children when they do go into these Peru's.
Yeah.
How can we push academically these children so they get what everyone else is getting?
Mm.
And actually, I just found it quite interesting. I noticed that you have a section on exclusions, and when we
Mm.
talk about Peru's and young black boys and dual heritage,
Yes.
white Caribbean boys.
Yes.
I think you mentioned they were overrepresented in exclusion, and a school to prison pipeline. Don't know if you want to say anything about exclusions or any of
Oh
that.
my goodness! I mean, this is
There's a lot.
we've only got 5 minutes left. I'm very aware of that, and I could probably talk a whole hour about exclusions if I'm honest. I going into the pupil referral unit was a real it was another education for me. I'd done my teacher training, I'd been in mainstream, I'd done my headship in mainstream, and then I went into pupil referral unit, and I almost felt like I had to start again. Unlearning a lot of the stuff that I had learned previously. I was overwhelmed by the number of children that were in these pupil referral units that had no, they had been told that they were going to be there for a short amount of time. You know, you're just going to go there to have a bit of respite, a bit of reprieve, and then suddenly
Yes.
they weren't ever allowed back again. And that's quite challenging to confront, and it's quite harmful, and it's very difficult. But actually, what I learned a huge amount there. So I definitely am concerned about the number of exclusions that we have, and the fact that it keeps rising. I think, you know, that little bit of reprieve that we had during COVID, where we were like, oh, what's happening, and then actually post COVID, it's spiked and it's gone right back up again. And having worked in a Peru, it's really clear to me that there are things that we could be doing in mainstream to challenge that. So, you know, the idea of early identification is really important. So, you know, I work
Yes.
with a lot of children in Peru that came with no identified needs, no EHCP, like nothing. They came with nothing, and
Yeah.
we were told it was just
Yeah.
behaviour. And then
Yeah.
within 4 to 6 weeks, we had identified the need and got them the support that they needed. And you just think, if that had been done really early on, if somebody had seen that their behaviour was communicating something, then it is likely they wouldn't have ended up in the pupil referral unit. And that's quite challenging for us to confront, but it's very
Yeah.
clear when you're, as you will have seen in a pupil referral, it's very clear that when you get there that there is an issue about children who are black or
Yeah.
racialized as black or dual heritage white and
Yeah.
black Caribbean, particularly boys, not having the
No.
early help that would probably make the difference. And I think there's been a huge explosion at the moment in terms of schools struggling with SEND. So actually, my concern is, how do we get that early help in? So that, because actually, if we don't, what's going to happen is the numbers are going to rapidly increase and spike, because, you know, if we're not identifying what those needs are, and there are so many more children that are having those needs, it's obviously going to have a knock-on effect on the exclusion. So I really worry about that. That's one of the things that I do sit and worry about quite a lot. How do we disrupt that? And I've been on lots of exclusion panels. I've worked with lots of
Good.
parents. I've worked with lots of children that have been excluded, and unfortunately, the
Yeah.
stories are very similar. The experiences are very similar. So if the stories are all the same, if the experiences are all the same, how is it that we're not disrupting? How is it that we're not disrupting it? And actually, the book is I think for me, if you follow the examples, the reading, the kind of the questions that the book is asking you to consider and reflect on, this should disrupt exclusions, because you're having all of those conversations that mean we are seeing the child, we are understanding where those unmet needs might be, and we're using our agency to find the support that's necessary, and we're also getting out of the way. I've said that already
Yeah.
today, and I think that's really important.
Yeah.
How we get out of the way and find the support that these young children need. So my hope is that if we utilise the book in the way that I have intended, and actually in a way that a lot of people have said to me that it's having the impact it is, it should be another way of kind of having those reflections and allowing us to really identify the support that our children need early enough, and getting them the right support that they are deserving of, and the right support that some children do get, to allow us to disrupt that.
And I really hope people do use it for all of that. I really do hope they do. Ollie,
Yeah.
can I ask, do you have 15 minutes? Do you have 15 minutes? If you don't, that's fine.
I do, definitely.
Okay,
definitely.
Lovely, because I can see that someone's asked you a question.
Okay.
And I don't know if you can see it, but Paul, hello Paul, thank you for listening.
Mm-hmm.
He said, morning, my primary school has many EAL children who are vast majority white. We have welcomed a Ghanaian and Nigerian family into school who are wonderful. The boy in my class is integrated really well, but I know a couple of boys act differently towards. Any tips?
Oh dear. That's a big question that I often get asked as well.
Okay.
And I think one of the things that I think is really important is that, and Paul, I think this is for everyone who works in education. I think sometimes we see things. So there are probably many teachers that see what you're articulating, Paul. But we're very busy. We've got lots to do. They're integrating well, so we're just going to keep going. And ultimately, we don't always do anything about those small scenarios that we recognise or see. And actually, it's really important that we do see them, as you have, and it's really important that we think, okay, what can my response be to that? So for myself, as I said, having those restorative conversations was really important as part of my practice. So if I see it, how can we have a conversation to explore that further? And the conversation might start with the whole class, first of all, because actually I'm trying to create allies in my class. What would I say? Not allies, co-conspirators is a term that Shireen Daniels uses, who I listened to her recently. But I'm trying to create co-conspirators in my class who will see where that exists also. So actually we're giving the children the agency to understand where they see children who might be being treated slightly differently, and what they can do to support, what they can do to help. So I think that's really important, that whole class discussion. I often used to use texts or stories that I thought were quite relevant to that, for children to be able to visualise and think about, what would you do? What would your response be? If you were the teacher, how would you challenge that? But I also think it's important to have those conversations with the children and bring them together to find ways, making them work together, making them get to know one another, because actually, by working together, by having to support one another in an activity, that's the thing that's going to challenge the biases that may be in effect. So the more that they get to know this child that's new to your class, the more that they will recognise the things that they have similarities on rather than the differences. And unfortunately, we live in a political context where we see differences everywhere. So actually, how do we allow the children to recognise those connections of where we are similar? I often, one of the things that I recommend in the book is doing you could call it a getting to know me activity, where the children have to talk about their background, their heritage, the things that are important to them, anything that kind of reflects and who they are. And we often used to do that as a whole school, because actually what happens is, by sharing one another's cultural heritage and background, again, we're reducing bias and racism in our children. So activities like that would really allow the children to see the benefits of one another. But I think Paul probably has done half the work already, because he's being honest and saying, I see it. So not turning away. Paul's not going, I'm too busy. Paul's not going, it's just kid stuff, they'll work it out. But Paul's actually saying, I see that there is an issue, and that's half of the problem. It's us, for staff, being able to be open and honest and have the time to say, yes, I see that exists. And then I think the next steps is how we educate the whole class, and how we educate staff as well, because if Paul's seeing it, and it's likely other staff are seeing it and not responding. So how we as a staff team make a decision that we're going to respond to that in a way that means that the children are encouraged to see the benefits of one another, and also your curriculum. So I could talk about this for another hour as well, but I won't, because we've already got an extra 15 minutes. But actually, the power of the curriculum in educating our children about why they should be, about the importance of all of us, and the importance of everything that we do in terms of, we've all kind of contributed to the UK, and the children need to understand that and see the power of all of us. And actually, the curriculum will be a really powerful way of addressing that as well, because if the children are continually seeing a decolonised or a diversified curriculum, they are continually seeing the power of the collective and why they are all important. I hope that's a helpful answer.
It was really informative. So let us know, Paul.
Yeah.
Let us know.
Please.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And actually, another question popped up just after that, and we've got from, sorry if I've said this wrongly, or the wrong way, so Robbo, but please feel free to correct me. And she says, Orleen, there are some people who find the term anti-racist an issue and wish to dilute it. What do you say to staff who have an issue with the term anti-racist training?
So this is another interesting question, because I often find it's not the staff who have an issue with that. It's often the leadership who have an issue with the term anti-racist. But where that does exist, I think it's right that we are aware of that, and you need to know what the battle is or what the challenges are that you're coming up against. And actually, for some staff, anti-racist can feel like a divisive term. For me, I can't, to have a conversation with someone and say, if somebody says, I'm struggling with that term anti-racist, it's almost like a how you reframe that question. So I'm struggling to talk about anti-racism, for example. Maybe it should be about inclusion, maybe it should be about diversity, maybe it should be, but actually being inclusive does not mean that you're diverse, and being diverse does not mean that you're inclusive. And actually what we're asking for is an active dismantling of racism. So it's not about I have a problem, why do you have a problem with using the term anti-racism? But it's about recognising there are many for whom they are experiencing racism in our schools and in our settings. So are you therefore saying that we don't want to challenge that for those children? And are you therefore saying that it's not a problem? So one of the things that I'm quite keen on is let's talk about your experiences growing up in the UK, because that will probably highlight why you have an issue. So I find it really challenging when people say to me, I think, I don't think it's anti-racism, and I don't think it, but actually that's not their lived experience. They haven't lived with racism. And actually it's really important that you speak to those who have, and you speak to those who have experienced it and continue to experience it, both in and outside of the school. But I think it's really important that, again, I don't want to talk about anti-racism. It's a bit like saying I don't want to focus on race. We've had that conversation already this morning, that the refusal to, we need to focus on all the other characteristics. We need to focus on all the other things. What about what about this group and that group, and what about this that needs doing, and that strategy that would be of importance. And actually, I think if we have a problem with the terminology, I feel like it could possibly indicate we're not ready to do the work. Because if we're arguing over the terminology, then actually my question is, are you actually doing anti-racism in your space then? You can't be if you're arguing with me about what we call it. So if we're committed to doing this work, then the terminology should be the easy part of the discussion.
And lots of reflection there, lots of reflection, and then that's all. They have to think, are they ready? But the thing is, our kids are ready. Our kids need it. So it's quite frustrating. And I just wanted to highlight, because guys, I really do recommend this book. I recommend it to every school. If Orleen, if I could buy your book and give it to every school, I would. And I think there's a chapter, and it's my favorite chapter, and it's a really important chapter, and it's chapter 9. It's called Parents as Partners. And I feel like I highlighted like everything in that chapter, because you speak about what is considered hard to reach parents. I think there's a section where you say to know how inclusive we truly are, we must also hear the voices of those parents who do not have the same power to amplify their voice and you mentioned the people who do amplify their voices. And I think you also said a way to measure how inclusive your school is would be to collect data at the point of which parents intersect with school engagement roles. A perfect place to start is your PTA. You know, yeah, and that made me think of the PTAs and what did they look like? You know, an inclusive school would have worked hard to engage all parents. And actually, I'm thinking, a lot of the schools I've been in, PTAs are not very inclusive, actually. No. And actually, then it made me think of, like, they used to go and talk about the governors. Look at the governors. Look at everything. And actually, you know, I decided last year I wanted to become a governor. And everyone was like, why are you becoming a governor? You're already, you have your own school. And I was like, you know, I'm in Tottenham. And I was just like, there's no governor, there's no considered young governor, and there's no black governor. Like, we need these things around, especially when the school is there's majority black children in the school. I just feel like by you mentioning these things, I just think it was so important. And for anyone who does get the book, I'd recommend, because also there is, sorry, I'm finding it now, there is a page where you talk about the practices you use to engage with parents and what does that engagement look like. So, for example, you mentioned newsletters, but you said, have you considered that parents who have English as a second language? You mentioned letters and emails home about activities and engagement. But as above, have you considered English as a second language? But also, do you recognise that these tend to be a very basic way of engaging that do not communicate positive relationships for some parents? You know, coffee mornings. But are you taking into consideration that not all parents can attend? You know, many parents work on Friday mornings. So I just... sorry, is there anything you want to say when it comes to that chapter? There, there's so much, I know.
So it's really interesting because I can obviously speak from the point of being in leadership in my school and the things that we might have done to challenge that. But I think it's also really important to recognise that even at my big age, having been in school, in my child's own school, they had a position that came up for parent governor, and I went for the role of parent governor. And you probably won't be surprised to realise that I didn't get it. And actually, the parents that did get it were very, you know, there was a lot of challenge there. So I kind of spoke to the parents about kind of all the things that I've done in education, what I'd really worked with the school to do. I felt like I gave a really good application, and obviously I would think that, but I know all of the things that are necessary for a governing body or to help a school to kind of thrive. But actually, what I hadn't accounted for was the bias of the parent population, and it took me right back to being that to go through that, and to, you know, having to talk to parents about going for the governing role. And, you know, I'd go to parents and I'd be like, I'm running for governor. No, not interested. And then I'd see other people that were running for parent governor that they'd stand and talk to for ages, or they'd engage in a conversation, and yet they wouldn't with myself. So it took me right back to, these are the challenges that parents are facing. So lots of people say to me, you know, diversify your governing board. But actually, if you're only going to do it through the parent governor role, then it's likely that it's not going to happen, because your school community have their own biases that they're dealing with. And they will vote for the parents that they trust because of characteristics that they were born into, not because of characteristics that they've earned. So it was really, that took me right back, and reminded me, again, I have daily reminders of the fact that I'm black, if I'm honest, and that was one of those reminders that don't forget who you are and don't forget where you are. So then luckily I worked in a school where the head teacher found an alternative way for me to be a governor. So I became a co-opted governor. Because she was determined. She really wanted me on the governing board, and was horrified when I wasn't voted in by the parents. But actually,
mad, but
absolutely. But we had to have that conversation. I explained to her the challenges that and that I would never do it again, because I'm not putting myself up for that. So I recognise why so many black parents or dual heritage parents don't put themselves up for that, because they're just like, the pain of having to go through canvassing and all that nonsense, only to know you're not going to be voted in, or to the pain of having to go through that, and the challenge, sometimes it's not worth it. So actually, as schools, we have to think about different ways of engaging our community. So, when we're thinking about being a governor, it's not just the route of parent governor. What are the other routes that we've got? What are the other routes that we could advertise to our community? When we're thinking about building our PTA, can we say to the PTA, actually, we really want it to be diverse. We really want this percentage of our parents because they make up this percentage of our school community. So therefore that should be the percentage reflected on the PTA. Do we want to have conversations about thinking about the staff that we engage in and what we can do to make it as diverse? So, but I think one of the things is that we've just come to that non-racist position of, well, that's just the way it is. And actually, if a school is being really anti-racist, we need to know that's not just the way it is. Actually, what can we do in our systems and processes to really drive that change? And there are things that we can do, and it does take time to think about that creatively. But actually, have we got staff members, parents that could help us in thinking about how we could disrupt that?
That is it. And I really do hope people are listening to this, and I really do hope they go on to purchase the book, because honestly, Orleen, thank you for giving up your time today to talk about your amazing book. Thank you to everyone who's been listening. And Orleen, I just thought I'd end because I read some of the reviews and I'm sure you've seen them, but they're such great reviews, and I'm just going to read a few where someone said, wow, this has to be the best book I've ever read as a parent about racism education in the UK. It's real, authentic and relatable. You had someone else saying, all parents must have, so that's great as well. Just wow, a book that will better equip and prepare us for challenging moments at school that our children can face when we're not there. You had someone else saying, if there's one book, buy this one. And this person said, I've worked in education for 20 years. And it was the first book I've read that reflects today's classroom and education for our children. I've taken away so many key points and reflections from the book. Not only will this help to improve practice within the classroom, it also translates to being a foster parent or just a parent in general. So, Orleen, it is such a great book, and I'm honestly, I'm a big advocate for it now. And honestly, I hope people have been listening, and please do share this space that we had. I believe it's been recorded. It will be on the same link, so feel free to share. People can listen back, but also Teachers Talk Radio will make it available as a podcast in the coming days, so you should be able to listen to it on Spotify, Apple Music, all of that. So you will have all of that. And please, like we said, there's a discount code TTR25 for this book. If purchased directly from the Sage website, you get 25% off. But Orleen, just thank you. Time's flown by.
It really has.
Time has flown by. But honestly, I'm very grateful to have you. So thank you.
Can I also say as well, somebody said they said great host. Sorry. And you were fantastic. It was really easy to talk to you this morning. And I feel re-energized talking to you, because I'm like, we're out there, we are doing the work. And equally, thank you so much for this opportunity. No, it was great to talk to you too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And I look forward to following everything you're doing. And honestly, like I said, my head teacher said that you are her head teacher, or you were working alongside her. So that's amazing. So, and she was just like, wow, like Orleen does amazing things. We've got a library, and she was like putting your book in it. So just just thank you for everything.
Thank you. And afterwards, please email me who she was, because I'm really keen to know.
I will do.
Thank you.
I will do.
And thanks everyone.
Thank you no problem. And thank you to everyone who's been listening. Please follow Teachers Talk Radio and continue to listen to our shows. Everyone, have a great Sunday and relax and enjoy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.